are discussing L4M8, that is procurement and supply in practice. And this is a CRM module. And we know that CRM module gives us the chance really to express what we know about an asked subject matter. So we happen to be quite very happy with this, because then it gives us the space to really showcase what we know and what we understand about a particular concept. So all our CR papers are 3-hour papers, as we know. So on average, that means that you need to be budgeting about 45 minutes per question. And this is something that we need to be basically able to understand before we get to an exam. I've often realized through both teaching and marking that students often tend not to budget adequately their time across all the 4 questions. And the result would be that one student writes 3, in some certain cases, 2 answers to 2 questions. Now, take it from me, it's very, very difficult for you to pass an exam without attempting all the questions, no matter how good your answers could have been on the questions that you would have attempted. And it's actually a very huge risk to try and answer less than the questions that the exam requires you to answer. So we need to be very mindful of that, and we need to make the point that we really budget our time effectively and efficiently, and make it a point that all the asked 4 questions are answered within the 3 hours given. So technically, on average, that means that we're gonna try and answer those questions, each being allocated about 45 minutes. Now, that's point number 1. It's very critical to do budget around the 3 hours that you are given to about 45 minutes per question. Now, that means that if you are writing your exam and you realize that you're almost hitting 45 minutes on your question number 1, and you are still very far completing that particular answer, you might probably need to round it up and look at the second question, just to make sure that you answer all the 4 questions in a very balanced way. So that's really something that we need to be able to understand. So it's clearly something that we need to practice and something that we need to be able to do. Now, that takes me down to the next part. Having spoken much about your time budget, we need to be able to look at where do we start in terms of responding effectively to any exam, any part of the world. You realize that the starting point in terms of answering our exams, guys, starts with understanding the content. And this is basically something that we need to make sure that we really have done. That's the starting point. I know you are signing in from different parts of the world, but the starting point, I will keep repeating this, is you understanding the content first. So your L4M8 module matters. Read it, understand what is in there. That's the starting point. And if you do not understand that first part, believe me, it's going to be very difficult for you to answer questions. So any exam that you're going to be passing starts with understanding the content. And then once you have understood the content, then you'll then have to understand what the question then wants. So without the content, really responding to a question in the exam can be a nightmare. So you need to make it a point that you get that particular part first. So guys, you still have a week or so before the final exam. Make it a point that you've gone through your modules and you've understood the content therein in preparation for your final exam. So understand the content, and that is going to be your road to passing the exam. So that's the other thing that I would want us to really talk about, which takes me down to the second thing, which is very important as well. Now, the second thing that I would want us to be able to talk about at this point is the command words. I'm sure this is something that's going to be very, very interesting to almost all of us. while understanding the content is the first step, passing an exam means knowing what the questions want and then specifically providing such. So typically, know the question task. And knowing the question task means you following the command, means you having to address a particular issue as required by that particular question. So understand your command words in this particular case. So your command words are words that are telling you what task you need to do in your exam. And from a CIPS point of view, we need to be understanding some of the common command words that we normally find ourselves meeting in the final exam. And some of the few command words that I would want us to really pay our attention to are those that are on your screen. So one of the command words that you are going to be seeing quite very commonly include appraise. Now, any question to do with appraising means you are evaluating, means you are assessing something, means you are making a judgment. So when you are responding to a question that says evaluate, judge, or assess, it's one and the same question. And basically, you are required to be giving views based on strengths and weaknesses of a given situation. I want us to be able to understand that. Any question that has to do with evaluating, judging, and making assessment means you've got to be able to make a correct judgment, giving your views based on where that particular issue is in terms of its strengths and weaknesses in a particular given situation. So it's really a very interesting thing that you understand that particular command word. You might also find out much more commonly a command word like describe as a second one. Now, in a description, you are giving a detailed representation of something. You are actually giving a full account of something. Much like you are also going to be meeting a question that would want you as a command word to literally define. So when you are defining, you are giving the exact meaning of a word. We are going to look at a typical example regarding this one. And then we'll also look into another command word, which is contrast. Now, contrast means you are looking at two things and saying where exactly those two things are dissimilar, meaning where they are actually literally opposing each other, right? So this may include approaches to a particular aspect of purchasing that you might be given within your exam. The word compare, so take note of this, means you are looking for similarities, right, regarding a particular issue. So you are examining one thing in relation to the other so that points of similarity are very clear as much as possible, right? So take note of that issue. You might also realize a question around evaluate, criticize. I think I already have given you what evaluate, assess, criticize is all about. You are making judgments about where something is strong or where something is weak. You are also making judgments about the good and the bad of a particular theory or of a particular opinion. And then, guys, as you are answering the questions, it's always very important, no matter what the command word could be, that you always support your decision. Where possible, give evidence, give examples. That is something that is much more important. And where you can also remember, try to give appropriate literature or theory. So we'll look at, again, a typical example of how you can do that. And then other words that you might also have, besides these ones that I've shared with you on the screen, are those other words. It's quite very common that you're gonna also be asked to explain. Now, when you're explaining, this is a very interesting question because largely it's all about giving reasons for or account for something so that it is clear or gets to be easily understood. So again, detail matters, but around the concept of giving some reasons or an account so that whatever you are explaining gets to be as clear as possible. You may also be given another question where your task is to identify. So if your task is to identify, that's a very interesting question because it won't give you so much of a headache. It's all about mentioning items separately, and you can use bullet points on questions that says identify, right? So if it's only identification, then you simply itemize separately the items in a particular order or by using bullet points. So this is also similarly if the person says list or enumerate. So again, this is something that I would advise that you guys follow through and then you get to understand. And then you might also be faced with the command word interpret. Now, an interpretation means you're going to be using your own words to explain the significance of something. So you're going to go back and say, what is the significance of this? Where exactly is this important? And that can be quantitative or qualitative. And the question which says justify, I think the justification means showing good reasons for decisions or conclusions, perhaps referring to other texts or evidence within a case study. You guys are going to be given scenarios. I think we must have realized that as part of our practice, where some of the questions are actually based on a given scenario. So check out what questions are being asked in that particular or about that particular scenario. Most of the times, we do expect you guys to be able to pick evidence from that particular given scenario or case study. And you justify, prove, give out some evidence with that regard. So the last part, I don't want us to keep talking about command words only, but a few more other command words that you might meet might include outline. And outlining means you are giving the main features. You are giving facts or the general idea of something, omitting minor details. So in an outline, we are not so minute. We don't drill down to very minor things. We keep ourselves around major issues about it, around the main issues about it. And that should really help us through with answering that particular question if it says outline. And a question that comes with propose means you've got to put forward for a consideration or for action, something else. So take note of that. You can put forward a point of view, an idea, an argument, a suggestion. And if the person says summarize, this is a brief, concise account of the main points of something. So a summary is kind of like an outline where you are now dwelling just on the key points regarding something, leaving out minor details and even examples. So this is something that is much more important. So the question which says propose goes together with the question that says also suggest, which means there may be more than one answer that you are probably given, but you must give the most appropriate one, right? So, and again, the question which says state, you are putting something into words clearly and briefly. And the question which would say show, in showing, you are explaining something thoroughly or you are proving something so that the truth can be established. So again, these are key words, command words, task words that I would want us to put in our mind as we prepare for the exam. And then the word that says reconcile would want you to show two apparently conflicting things that appear similar or compatible. And when you make a review, you are examining and assessing a subject critically. So these are basically some of the key things that the exam would be asking you to work around. So it's something that I would want you to really pay your attention to as much as possible. So see what we are talking about in this particular case. Now, I wanted us to also look at this particular part where you guys are going to be asked two types of questions technically within your exam. Some of the questions are going to be free questions, all right, where you are asked directly and there's no case or there's no scenario about that particular question. And then the second type is the case-based question. Now, in a case-based question, this is scenario-based. So, guys, here is something that I would want you to be able to basically understand. When scenarios are put in your question or in your exam, and the question follows that particular scenario, it is always very important that you go through that particular scenario, understand what the scenario is all about, and look at the question really, and connect the question to the scenario. Now, in my experience marking at CIPS, I realized that students have a tendency to just write something because what is being asked is something that they know. And they can go ahead and do that. But without referring back to the case study, I think you will still produce a very weak answer. Because the whole idea of the case study is to try and make sure that you make a specific reference to that particular case. And your answer then becomes complete. So guys, here is what I would want you to be able to do. Read the scenarios, read the case study. Now, the easier way, from my experience, and I think others that might have experience that would also be a testimony to it. The most important thing that you're probably gonna do, because it's gonna be also a race against time, try to read the question first. You get to question number 2 and there's a scenario. Before you read that particular scenario, my word of advice, guys, is quickly look at the question. What does the question want you to do? Now, once you have looked at the question, underline the command word in there, and then start reading your scenario. Now, as you are reading your scenario, what exactly are you doing? You are already saying this is what the question wants. What part of this particular scenario is addressing the question? So it is always a very good starting point that you go straight to the question before you read the case study, and then move back, flip backwards to the case itself after you have read the question and you've understood what the question wants, such that as you read through, you already are linking the scenario to what the exam question wants you to do. So look at the task that the question would want you to address, and then look into the scenario and pick up all those parts or those areas that needs to be given as evidence to your question. And I think this is something that I would want us to start practicing now, because we won't be having that much time. So guys, read the question first about a scenario, and then flip to can you link to the question. So don't answer a scenario-based question without making a reference back to the scenario itself. That's the whole essence why the case would have been given. So it's much more important that you understand exactly those key points that I've raised. So you will find that some questions will use a scenario or data sources to introduce you to a particular situation or give you a particular context and refer back to that particular case. Every other time you are answering such questions, always remember to link up your answer to the case as much as possible. And this is something that is quite much more important. So as you are answering a question with a scenario, you are not only demonstrating your understanding of the subject matter, you are also understanding or demonstrating your understanding of the context against the question. So it's problem solving that is coming through. So demonstrate a very good understanding and follow and adhere to your command words as much as possible. So construct a response that is based on that scenario, give evidence based on the scenario as much as possible. So this is something that is quite much more important. So read through questions, guys. It's always important. Read through questions and plan your answers accordingly. I'm seeing there's Mancia's question. I mean, his hand is up. Am I right? Mansia, I saw your hand up. You've got a question? All right. If you don't have a question, what I wanted to talk about much was really how do you approach a case-based question against a question that is not necessarily based on the case. So I think as far as that is concerned, we are warm and dry. Now, guys, I also wanted you to pay attention to how your questions are asked. You are going to find out that in your CIPS L4M8, much like the rest of the other CRR papers at level 4, at level 5, and at level 6, what I want you to be able to realize is you need to pay attention to the number of marks per every question that you're answering. It's gonna be something that will help you in the long term. Pay attention to the number of marks per each asked question. If the question is saying 5 marks, pay attention to that. If the question says 10 marks, pay attention to that. It can be saying 15 marks, pay attention to that. And it can be one solid 25 marks. You need to be paying attention to that. Now, why should we be drawing each other's attention to the number of questions, I mean to the number of marks per question? Why I'm raising that with you before you go down for your exams, wherever you are coming through from, is the amounts of information you're going to be providing on any part of the question depends on the number of marks being awarded. So the marks share or tell you or guide you in terms of the quantity you should be able to put through. And pay attention to that. If the question comes in your exam and says, discuss 5 advantages, guys, pay attention to that. Because if you're going to be discussing 6 advantages, as an examiner, what we will do is we'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anything beyond the required content, I'm not going to really look at it. So look at that. So do not waste time by trying to go beyond the required amount. Stick to the number of points required. Stick to the number of items required on that particular question. Anything beyond that is going to be a wasted budget. You don't need to do that. Just pay attention to that. So that's point 1. Let's look at the other scenario where you're going to be asked about five things again, and you go on and write 2 or you write 3. Again, that clearly should knock into your mind that you are providing less than is required. And the chances are that you may not do well again in that particular exam. So there's a risk in writing less than the required amount, less than the required content, or less than the required points. There's also a risk when you are writing too much, the risk of wastage, and probably not even finishing the exam. So try to be very precise, try to be very concise, and straight to the point whenever questions are being asked. So take note of those things there. So your exams are very good. They'll always indicate how many points are required. Now, here's the thing, guys. What might also happen is that you may not necessarily be given, some questions might not provide you with a specific number of points, which I think those are here and there. But where the question is not very specific about the number of items, the number of points that the question wants, what you can best do is, as a guiding principle, this is something that I want you to be able to know. Your questions will always be 25 marks. And from my experience, I've also realized that on average, that means that you've got to be raising about 5 points So each point you raise, explain it, give an example, will make one paragraph. And then you go again to the next point, do the same, write detail about it, give an example in that particular paragraph. Then you go to paragraph number 3. So on average, guys, on average, based on our experience in marking and also in taking through people through different exams, you need to be making sure that you create very clear paragraphs. Each paragraph must address one point. You explain that particular point, and then also you give an example where possible. Now, on average, each paragraph is going to be 5 marks. Each paragraph is going to be 5 marks. So if a question is 25 marks as it is, make it a point that you raise 5 points. Each point you raise, explain it, give a strength, give a weakness, say where it is good, where it is bad, give an example. You will always find your answer to be good. And there is no point or there is no way you're going to fail that exam. So the amount of detail you put is very important. And also the key aspects of that detail should be such that you explain the point, you describe it, you give some detail about it, and then try to always give an example where possible. Demonstrate that you are not only understanding just the module, but you are also understanding the practical application of it. And that's something that's going to really go a long way. So make it a point that on average, all your answers are on average 5 paragraphs. And each paragraph essentially could be having between 5 to 7 to 8 lines, depending on how you write as well. So on average, we're going to be having 5 lines to 6 lines, each paragraph explaining a point, putting up some detail about it, and then coming up with some examples. So this is something that is going to guarantee you of a good passing mark. Now, you might have realized that I'm talking about the points. So the other question that somebody might be having is, what do we do? Are we not supposed to be putting an introduction? And I think that's a very good and a very smart answer. I mean, question. What about the introduction? Now, as far as CIPS is concerned, what we normally do is that we normally don't give you points on your introduction. We normally don't do that. But I would advise, this is a very global outreach that we are having here. I advise that try to come up with a very brief and very to the point introduction about what you are talking about. So your introduction could be somewhere where you start off by explaining a particular concept. Suppose you are being faced with a question that says, identify 4 types of stakeholders. Now, that's a question on stakeholders. So my expectation would be your good introduction could be starting off with telling us what are stakeholders. Then it will go on to probably give examples of stakeholders. And then you now say, we are going to be discussing 4 categories of stakeholders below. So it's a signpost as to where actually your answer is going to go in terms of direction. And that's going to be something that is super good for you to do. So take note of that particular part where you talk about your introduction around what the task is going to be in terms of the subject matter. So that's one thing you can do. And if you can remember the theory, the better. Like you're talking about stakeholder, you describe or define what stakeholders are, you give examples, and you probably might link that up to the theory that we normally use when we are doing stakeholder mapping, in which case now is the power interest matrix or your stakeholder or Mendeley matrix. So it's really important that you're also trying to bring in a related theory within your answers and try to be as concise, as brief as you can to that point. And then you go down to now writing your 5 key points or your 4 key points regarding that matter. Now, why should we care about the introductions if they're not that much helpful? Introduction will help a lot in the event that you score Some mark close to 50, but less than 50. Because what then we're going to do is we have got to go back and say, okay, fine. Where can I really award this student some mark or marks to take them to the passing mark? So introductions are not useless. They are very handy in your exam. And they're going to go a long way to actually avoid you get into a situation where there is no way else somebody can award you a mark and ends up giving you a 48 straight. And they can't change that because there is no way else that they can try and sniff around and get some very good points to raise you up to 50. So again, it's much more important that we get to understand that particular key element. So I've talked about the introduction, and in your case, we do not have, or we do not use so much of referencing in terms of our constructed answers. We don't normally do that. But the introductions really, I would expect you to try and do that. Referencing may not be really a matter that you should worry so much about at this point, unless we are talking about L6M4, which is literally an exam that is also CR, but based on a given theme. So that's where referencing could literally come through. And others would want to look at the wrong spellings, wrong grammar, and etc. Is that penalized? I think we need to also talk a little bit about that. In this particular case, we don't usually penalize you for wrong spellings and then for poor grammar. The CIPS exams, guys, CIPS exams are very, very objective in terms of the way we mark. And we really try to do everything we can to make you pass an exam. So when you find yourself not making it up in an exam, I would want you guys to really know that we would have done the best that we could under the circumstance to try and see you pass. But sometimes it doesn't always come out the way we wanted and see you pass. But we would have looked for any and everything good that would have presented and try to award you accordingly. So if ever there is a very fair exam and marking system that I've ever seen, I think with the experience I have with CIPS, it's one of the fairest assessments you will ever take. Very fair and very objective in all cases. So try to really also understand part and parcel of those particular situations. So it's really something that you guys, I would want you to be able to basically understand. So I think, having said that, this could be, what I did here was to try and just take you through some of the key questions that might be asked. For example, there's identify five signs that the buyer at a particular organization could look for to indicate that certain suppliers are experiencing financial difficulties. So it's just identification. Remember, you are to identify 5 and you are getting 5 points. Remember what we have said about the task or command words. So in this particular case, it's a question of writing your bullet points, just to demonstrate what we were saying. And then from there now, if you look at the B part of the question, explain 3 approaches that the buyer at that particular company could take to obtain reliable information from these suppliers' financial positions. So what approaches could they use to obtain reliable information about the supplier's financial position? So again, take note of the approaches you could be talking about in that particular regard. So again, that should be something that should be quite very interesting. So if you're going to be looking at that, it could be getting published financial statements and accounts. It could be credit rating companies or agents that they could go to and get that information. It could be reports in business or trade press about that particular supplier. They could also get the information through networking with other customers or direct discussions with the supplier's financial director. So these are some of the things that you could be looking at in terms of, but as you are doing this, remember this is the B part, and you only need to be raising about 3 as per the question, if we go back to our question, 3 approaches. Now, you pick up an approach, right? Suppose the approach you have decided to pick on in this particular case is a credit rating agency, where you are going to be getting credit rating scores for each of the suppliers that you really want to understand their financial situation. You need to tell us, how exactly are you going to get this? So you approach the credit rating agency, and of course, the credit rating agency is going to do that for you, but for a fee or for a charge. And you probably might need to look at what do they put up and crunch to calculate the credit rating score. And more importantly, what does the credit rating score mean when it's too high or when it's low in terms of the risk with regards to the financial situation of the supplier? So that would be a very simple paragraph on that. So if you raise those nicely, you're going to get 5 points on that. And then you go to the next paragraph where you're probably going to talk about discussing the supplier's financial situation with their financial director. So you're going to call the financial directors from the supplying organization, and you're going to try to also engage, of course, doing this as part of your teamwork with your own finance department, and they come and present their financials to you, particularly the areas that you would want to understand. Of course, you need to tell us what will be the strength and what will be a little bit of a challenge with doing that. So that should see you probably scoring the 5 points we have talked about. So you can go on and on raising issues around that. So this is something that I wanted us to be basically able to realize at this point. Students normally don't do well when they don't answer all the questions. There is a problem there. Try to make sure that you budget your time. This other thing that I've also realized from my capacity and my experience is where students do what we call dumping. Dumping is when you are blank of a particular answer and you just say anything goes, you just put in there, despite this other information not really addressing the question. So this is something that must be avoided. And the best way to avoid it is through you guys really preparing, go through your study guide, understand your key concept. When you understand your key concept and understand the question, it becomes very difficult for you to do dumping. And then the other thing that I've also seen as a pressure point that you guys need to work on is when you are given a scenario and you don't link your answer to that particular scenario. I think that's going to also create a very sticky scenario for you. Make it a point that you link your answer to what is obtaining within the case or within the scenario. And I think that's going to go really a long way to really seeing you pass. So those are some of the critical points that I've also realized. Then the other thing that I've also noted becoming a little bit of a challenge is when you make your work very difficult to follow. You know, it then makes it very difficult for any marker to follow your work. This is one reason why I was saying, just keep your answers very simple. Every paragraph is a new point that you explain, that you give examples to, right? Then that should really make your answer very easy to follow, but also clear. So this is, again, something that I would want us to be able to realize. So budget your time. Make sure that you follow the command word to be able to deal with the task specifically required by the question. And then also make sure that, guys, you are professionals. You are already practicing. Try to pull examples from your work to demonstrate your understanding of a particular idea from a work-based practice. And I think that's going to go a long way to making your answer really very outstanding in the end. So all the people that get very outstanding marks, they get distinctions, are able to demonstrate understanding of the idea and be able to illustrate it through giving examples or through giving scenarios. So this is something that I think we should be able to do. Those were the key points, or those are the sticky points, really, that as students, you need to work around. Get to know your study guide, know your command words. A combination of that, plus budgeting of your time and being precise in the way you answer your questions, you can't go wrong. So it's really something that I would advise that we keep doing and we start practicing before the exam. Sometimes some of you could be studying on your own. Even when you are studying on your own, try to make it a practice here and there. You got friends that you're working with. You could be writing a particular question and try to bounce it with one of your friends and say, what do you think about my answer? Right? So, or if you are close to a study center, I think that will really go a very long way. We are very much excited, guys, to be really helping you pass this particular exam. Now that we are living in a digital world, which I think is a plus on your end, there are so many people that you are realizing that have gone or that have studied CIPS, and some of them who are really lecturers and tutors in various colleges around the world. Write a particular answer, bounce with them, get some good feedback from them with regards to how your answer looks like, and you can improve from there. Right? I think
Thank you so much for
I
that.
stand to answer more if you happen to be having more questions around that.
While they still have questions, I think during your presentation, and I think when you were answering one of the questions, you sort of encourage
Yeah,
the students to use the tools. So now I'm going to share my screen. So
yeah.
if you can check on the chat box there, there's a link that I posted there that takes you to the CIPS exam resource platform. So it's this official CIPS website, but it's the exam resource section, and this is where students can find the intelligence hub, the articles of different topics
Yeah,
that you're talking about, and the sample questions. So I'm just going to demonstrate to the
yeah,
students on this webinar on how to do that. Please let me know if you see my different
correct.
screen. I should leave this one to this one.
Yeah, let's do that.
So if you can check, this is this official CIPS website. So when you get to the CIPS official website, you must just go to students and qualifications, and
Correct.
then
Yeah,
you're gonna go to exam resources, and then under exam resources it's named exam success, tells you how to prepare for a computer-based exam. You watch the video, and then there's different levels where you'll be able to find sample exam question papers. So we are discussing level 4 today, so you can select view level 4 resources, and then just give it a second to load. So the study guide, the e-learning book, the e-book, the revision aids, these ones you will have to pay for them. But then there's a lot of free resources. When you scroll down, there are recommended reading for level 4. There's also sample questions and answers. So for L4M8, there's two of them. It's an exam. It has a question and it has a recommended answer for that particular question. You can download both of these in PDF format and you can use them to prepare for your exam. Then there's also the Intelligence Hub. So we were looking at L4M8 and Mr. Makonyo discussed all of those 4 chapters. So all of those 4 chapters, they highlight all of sort of the key discussions. For example, he spoke about ESG. When you click on it, there's an article, there's a video. He spoke about modern slavery. If you can see, it should be modern slavery somewhere here. It was the fourth L4M8. Where is it? L4M8. There we go. I think chapter 4 talks about modern slavery, supply diversity, ESG, and sustainability.
yeah,
So there's a lot of content that you can use whilst you still prepare for your exams. But there's also additional tools that you can use, which is master classes. So before every exam series, our CIPS global team, they will record master classes. You can find that on our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is at CIPS Web, and just look for a playlist that is named CIPS Master Classes. So this is the official CIPS YouTube page at CIPS Web. That's the name. So if you look for CIPS exam masterclasses, there's quite a few masterclasses that have been recorded by our knowledge team. I know there was one that was recorded last year that talks about this level 4 syllabus update. Some were talking about ESG, it was talking about ESG governance, and so there's various tools that you can use to prepare for your level 4, not particularly level 4 M8 only, but for all your level 4 exams. So those are some of the tools that Mr. Mukonyo was talking about that you can use. There's also platforms. There's the CIPS Connect platform where you can engage with people who have completed the CIPS syllabus before, just to ask them for tips on how they sort of succeeded when they were doing their CIPS qualification. So those are different platforms, those are different tools that as CIPS we are willing to offer you, really to